Hello, everyone, friends and folks. Welcome back to the brand spanking new Creator Spotlight series. We're very, very excited to have you joining us today. I'm Carol. I'm the program manager and Twitch host here at Unity. And this is my great, he's on this side now.
Hello.
My very awesome host, Hassan.
I'm Hassan, community manager and co-host of Twitch streams. Nice to be here with this all this fancy new animations and Twitch graphics all around us.
Yeah, I hope you guys like it. Let us know how you think about it, because we are on the first day of an entire summer-long series for Creator Spotlight. So Creator Spotlight is just going to be a whole summer-long series where we're going to be featuring all our favorite Made with Unity creators. Everyone here that we're going to be featuring is going to have a great upcoming game that we're very excited to talk about. You're going to see exclusive footage. You're going to see like tips behind the scenes tips, a lot of studio tours, and today I'm really excited to kick it off very strong with Devolver Week because Unity loves Devolver. And our first game is very special, very dear to my heart because I love this art style. I love the concept. We're gonna introduce Nerial's Card Shark.
That's right.
So let's take a look at this great game. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Hassan.
No, sorry. I was just gonna mention. I just want to thank everybody for joining us, like from Twitch and some of you from Discord and some people from the Asset Store. If you're not joining us from the Asset Store, I just wanted to mention that we have the Smash Hit Summer Sale going on right now on the Asset Store. We have weekly Asset Store sales for 6 weeks, and today is the final day of the 2D sale. And speaking of 2D, today's game is an incredible 2D game. It's Card Shark, a card-based adventure game where you must fleece and cheat at high-stakes card games to make your way to the top of 18th century French society. So it's a hand-drawn 2D game coming to Nintendo Switch and PC.
So I'm the lead designer and producer of Card Shark, and I will let Ben present him.
I'm Ben. I'm a developer on Card Shark, and that's all I'm developing at Nerial.
Hello, I'm Nikolai, and I'm the artist, animator, and the team's expert on card cheating, which doesn't mean I am an expert on card cheating myself, but that within the team I am.
Nice.
That's what he has to say on stream.
Full disclaimer. I don't claim I can cheat at cards in Las Vegas, but I
have some ideas about it. You know a thing or two.
Yeah. So to say I'm amateur magician. So that's how I know a fair amount of information about card manipulation and cheating techniques.
Nice, thanks. So why don't we take a look at the trailer, and then Arnaud can tell us a little bit about more about the game. Sorry.
Carol's dog loves the trailer.
Somebody liked the trailer, yes.
Somebody enjoyed the trailer. That's Pepper, Carol's dog, who's frequently featured on our Twitch streams.
So sorry about that.
Through our clips,
it's part of our stream checklist. We cannot have a stream without dog voicing.
I think we need a pepper emoji, Carol, for the stream. What do you think of that? Since she's in all of our streams.
Sorry about that. That was probably very loud for a lot of you who are using headphones. But yeah, I watched that trailer at least like 15 times already today just to like get a feel for it, and I still get really excited even at the end title sequence because it's so exciting and it looks so great. So Arnaud, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the game and what it's about, this team and everything?
So what I can do is to talk about the origin of the project, if you want. So I know Nikolai since a long time, like maybe 10 years or something like that, maybe even more. And we were a neighbor in Madrid when I was living in Madrid. And Nikolai is still based in Spain. And he introduced me at the time to indie games because I didn't know anything about indie games. And I was thinking it was kind of impossible to make a game with a small team or just by yourself. And that's why once I knew a little bit about games, and I was starting learning about them, and I moved to London to work in a small studio as a game designer, graphic designer, even at the beginning. And it's when the passion starts, thanks to him. And I did work on Reings, the game Reings, with mobile games. Who was quite successful, and we created a studio with a writer of Reings. We started the studio when we start actually Card Shark, and Ben wrote us, sent us a curriculum and asked us, "Oh, are you looking for people in the studio?" And we were not looking for anyone, but his curriculum was so good we could not really refuse him. So we said, okay, now we are going to start to have some employee, and it's how Card Shark really started. What Card Shark is about, it looks like a card game, but it's not a card game. You're not actually playing card in Card Shark. You are cheating at card. You are learning how to cheat, which is actually quite different. And the writer of Card Shark is also the writer of Reings, who is François Alliot, who wrote most of the story. So the common point between Reings and Card Shark is a narrative game. So, and you are going to travel around France, in a lot of different locations. You are going to meet a lot of people on your way, and the way you learn how to cheat and how you cheat them will have actually an influence on your own life, or probably also death. So you need to be very careful when you learn a trick, and you need to manage the pressure and how much you are going to bet on the table to be able to continue the journey. But I can let Nikolai talk about it a little bit more, if you want.
So yeah, wondering where should I carry on? I guess one interesting thing, at least from my part, is that the game features actual cheating techniques that are real, that are documented from Magic and cheating books. And while it's not a simulator where we exaggerate some of the things to give more of the fantasy of living the life of a cheater and cheating at cards, the logic behind what you're doing with a deck of cards is pretty much exact. And many of the things that we show you could do, like not all of them rely in extremely complicated things. However, as Arnold said, you have an accomplice who you travel with, and this is most of the time a key when cheating at cards, is to cheat in collusion. So one of the interesting aspects, at least for me, is that in this game you play a bit of you play a character who stays in the shadow, because you never take the glory. It's your accomplice who wins, and you're the invisible force who influence the table and influence the luck of who's gonna win and who's gonna lose. But you don't become famous and rich yourself. The glory is for your partner.
See, and I would love to hear a little bit more about the rest of the team. So we have 3 of you with us today, but there are more people on the team, isn't that right, Armand? So I would love if you could give the rest of the team a shout out as well.
So we started the project with a very small team at the beginning. It was just me, François as a writing, Ben and Nikolai. But the scope of the game make us like we needed more talent to be able to finish the game. So we have 2 more developers who are Neil and Ludwig. We have Daisy, who is helping me with design. We got a very good intern who helped us to track all the bugs, who is called Kevin. We got Tamara, who is the CEO of Nerial. And after we got a musician. the music is a big part of the game too. Who is called Andrea. The music is inspired by the music of the time. There is some track who are going to be like pieces of Bach, for example, or Mozart, but some have been written by Andrea himself to try to fit the game the best way as possible. And I hope I didn't forget anything, but yeah, we are relatively a small team. We are still like kind of indie games to do this game, like this small thing. Mm-hmm.
Great. And for people coming into this game who don't really know how to play cards or don't know anything about poker or counting cards or anything, do you need to come in with an understanding of cards, or is this accessible to anybody and then they're walked through the game?
So you don't need to know how to play cards at all, and what need to be known will be taught during the game. So we got onboarding, like your accomplice, we actually teach you how to play, because the main character don't know anything about cards. So during your progression in the game, you are going to learn this skill little by little. Mm-hmm.
I see. So you're learning through the lens of the main character, essentially.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And yeah, so this game is following Reings, as you had mentioned. It's funny because every time I would talk about Reings or tell people about the Reings, I'd always describe it as a card game where you swipe cards and you make choices, but in reality, it's not a card game. But this is more of a card game, right? This has a lot more focus on actually playing cards. I'm wondering, when you were working on Reings or making Reings, did a lot of people refer to it as a card game? And how did you feel about that, or how did you talk about Reings in relation to how you talk about this?
So when you think about Tinder, do you think Tinder is a card game?
I don't. But I guess it's that in Reings you're presented with certain cards with an image and writing, and you're kind of.
Yeah, but the main inspiration actually for Tinder, for Reings was Tinder.
Well, I see.
And I think also is in terms of which position you are. Like when you play Reings, you can have this feeling of power and deciding between like human being. And if you try to analyze it, there is something quite awful about it. Like to feel so much power. So I think that was the one of the strong idea of Reings. And if you really put this idea to an extent, who got the much power? It's a king. So you are you are incarnating the king, like you are playing as a king, trying to do your best with this kingdom where everybody is a little bit weird. And I think what is probably the same in Card Shark is it's role playing in the end. In this one, you are playing a character. You got the feeling you are mastering everything, but even if you try to master, you will never really master everything. There is always some parameter you will not be in control, and that's where the narrative kick in. Like the story is always full of surprises, and that's common point I think with Reings is you feel in control, but you are never really in control.
I see. Okay, so on that, would you like to give us an exclusive little look into the first scene of the game?
We can look into the animation process, and we can look. It's not one of the first scenes, but I think it's a scene with is interesting in terms of animation, of story, but also to make you understand the spirit behind the game. With the ship, who is based in Marseille. We can watch the video if you want, and after I will let Nikolai and Ben talk about it.
Okay. Let's cut to that.
But you don't have the money to pay for the trip, so you need to win your ticket playing cards.
And so,
And in the game, it's always the same structure. So you have to bet to decide how much you want to bet. And after, like in this mini game, for example, the shiner on the table, you are using it. You are using the reflection of the card, so you can pick the card in the reflection.
that's incredible.
And you need to
And so-
remember the value of this card for the next turn, the next part of the strategy.
Are you given a little introduction before this scene, or does it jump right into this?
No, there is an introduction before the
There's
scene.
okay.
Yeah, because you always prepare what you are going to do, so you never really improvise. And in this part, you already win. So you win the money, and you continue to a second round. And at the bottom of the screen, you can see a suspicion bar. So the suspicion will increase in function of with the time, but also if you make mistake, it will increase even more. And if it reaches the right part of the bar, you lose. Like they know you are a cheater. So you always need to keep that under control. And here you can see a variation. It's because it's a bot. The bot is actually moving. So the China is actually sliding on the table. It makes the technique more complicated.
I see. So,
That's very
and
clever.
are those little touches that you can't anticipate, like being on a boat? That's probably not part of the rehearsal, right? Like beforehand, or
Yeah, no, it's a surprise. This is a surprise.
it's more of a
for the player.
surprise. That's really cool. Okay.
Yeah, I think like the chat has already noticed, and it's been mentioned several times, and it's again one of the reasons I really was attracted to this game is the beautiful animation style, the fluidity of the animation, which I'm sure Nikolai can talk more about, but you know, it really speaks to my style of playing games and just card games, even board games actually. I'm not a very aggressive player, I'm much more subversive. I like to play low key, so this game really speaks to that like part of my type of gameplay. And maybe Nikolai, you can talk a little bit about your inspiration, because I think all of these elements really like play into the very unique style of this game.
So, I mean, in terms of inspiration, there's a variety of things. There's, of course, Barry Lyndon was the trigger for this project, or one of the triggers. It's a movie I loved since I was a teenager, and it kind of merged with my interest in card magic. I started learning card magic as a hobby like 4 or 5 years ago, and at some point during that process of learning, I remembered Barry Lyndon has this very memorable scene when the main character cheats at cards. And it's a very short scene in a like 3-hour movie, it's like 10-minute scene, but everybody who has seen the film, or most people remember it, is very memorable. So at that point, I remembered that and I was like, oh, actually, what if you had a game that is that scene from Barry Lyndon, but that's the entire game. You just travel around Europe and you in 18th century France, and you cheat the nobles and you climb the social ladder and you learn new tricks. And because I was learning magic, I knew the possibilities of the kind of interactions you could have. I knew like the magic has some parts of dexterity, some parts of memory, some parts of observation. So there's a variety of skills that you get to develop. That is very interesting already. And I also knew that it has a very satisfying loop, learning and practicing and performing loop. Like you learn some techniques, you learn how to achieve something, you practice that, then you learn a sequence that puts those individual techniques in order to achieve something bigger. Then you practice that, and then you perform under pressure. So like I was performing in front of friends, I was trying to do magic tricks for them. And you get that high of adrenaline of if you screw up, you have to do it right, you have to do your timing. And so I knew it was very satisfying. So that's what we try to bring to the game, is it has that loop. You learn techniques, you learn to put them together, and then you execute under pressure. This time, in our fiction, very often under the pressure of your life, rather than just screwing up a trick. But this is the basic same idea.
Yeah, awesome. And you have like a very, like Nikolai, you are an artist, an animator. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how this actually played in a huge into a huge aspect of the game?
Yes, so I started as a book illustrator like more over 10 years ago. I did that for a while. Then I studied animation filmmaking in France, and I studied that initially out of like curiosity and expanding like my range of knowledge. I grew up in Spain, but I was born Russian, so I saw in my childhood a lot of Russian and Eastern European animation, which has stuck with me for a long time. I found it particularly touching and fascinating. And when I started studying animation, that came back. I started studying that more closely and realized that as an adult, I kind of liked it even more than as a child. So it became one of my main references for my work as an animator and as an illustrator for a long time. And then when I moved slowly into video games, I saw that as an opportunity to bring those references, which are much more common in illustration animation, but I realized that in video games it's much more rare to have this kind of art styles. So it's an interesting place to bring something that's a bit foreign and experiment with it.
Yeah, for those who don't know much about that art style, maybe we can pull it up, show a reference, the Eastern animations references that Nikolai was inspired by, which is really quite beautiful. Some people in chat like recognize it as well. It's a very unique style from the 80s, correct?
Yeah, this is mostly 80s. This is a small compilation we selected from several filmmakers that I really like. And I guess like there's particular things that fascinates me about this kind of subgenre of animation. There is particular art styles that I think inherit a lot from classical painting, from folk art, sometimes from modern illustration. So they deviate a lot from what has become more standardized as the outline and flat colors we see in most commercial animation nowadays. These people were experimenting with more painterly styles, and they were of course limited by technique. No computer animation here, so there's a lot of camera tricks and a lot of uses of paper and textures, and sometimes it's pretty rudimentary. And there's a simplicity in it that I really like. Like you rarely see very exaggerated gestures or characters like stretching and squashing like in cartoons, like in American cartoons, at least a lot less. Instead, you see a lot more focus on small gestures and the appreciation of small details, the everyday mundane details that often I find are amplified by their style, by the care they take into animate with great detail the simplest actions. They become really, really beautiful. So that is one of the things I wanted to bring. Like on one side is when I was studying animation, after trying a bunch of different techniques and materials and stuff, I ended up on paper cutouts under camera, like a physical paper cutout marionettes. And that's what I was ended up doing the most. I found that the most enjoyable to work with, just having tiny piece of paper to manipulate on a camera. So that's part of what I took. That's a technique that was very popular at the time, and you see a lot of animators using it. The other was this particular focus on the simple things, like amplify and really care about a simple thing, like tiny gestures and simple actions, and do them with a lot of care, so bring kind of attention to them so they become truly beautiful.
I'm wondering, so when you're in that process of animation, giving things that care, especially when you're doing it physically, how does that convey when you're doing it digitally?
Right.
Is it a similar approach?
Well, I guess we could switch to showing you how the characters work in my screen.
Yeah.
And so I can explain how I try to translate that to work on Card Shark, because it's as I said, yeah, that's the like this paper cutout style and technique. Doing it actually physically is what I enjoy the most. So I try to make my digital process as close as possible to that, both in terms of making it more pleasurable for me as an animator, but also try to preserve the things that I think the imprecision of working with physical material that you cannot control exactly gives you some things of organic nature, like the fact that you cannot fully control, you have a degree of imprecision and a certain lack of control adds randomness that is perceived as beautiful, I believe, because it's more organic, and we tend to perceive things that are organic as more beautiful. At least that's what I believe. Like even in 3D, when you have like a metallic object, people always add like dust and scratches and dirt and stuff, so it's more organic, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's completely shiny, perfect, we perceive it as artificial. Yeah, it's too perfect.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real. You can't immerse yourself into the experience almost.
Yeah, exactly. So I try to add a little bit of element of imprecision in how the characters are built, so we have by default that level of organic feel. So if we can show my screen, I can talk a little bit about it.
Nikolai's screen.
Yes. So you have seen, like in the trailer, these characters, and we are using a software called Spine that integrates very well with Unity, and it's been a really useful tool to work with. And as an animator, I really enjoy it, working with this tool. It's really nice. And so one of the things with how characters are built to achieve this, what I'm talking about, is first, like Spine works as a skeleton to which images are attached, and sprites are attached. But in my case, how I structure the character is that nothing is attached to anything. Like basically everything is separate pieces, and there's no real hierarchy, and there's no like inverse kinematics, no fancy stuff like that.
Yeah.
So everything is just floating sprites that have no order to them, and that's one of the things that I do on purpose to make it more like a paper thing, where you have this fluidity and imprecision. The program is not going to carry for you, like when you move the torso, the program is not going to carry for you where was the arm attached. Okay?
I get, so that way you don't get the same result every time.
Yourself. Yeah, so you get a little bit of play with that. The other thing is the art style itself is quite simplified. The fact that it's not very realistic helps say cheat a lot, basically. It means that where the arm is attached exactly doesn't really matter, because the drawing still reads as correct. So you get a lot of leeway into how things are pieced, and they're still perceived as correct. Like this can be a little bit misaligned, and overall you're not going to be noticing it. Whereas if you have something much more realistic, you are going to need it to align much more perfectly. So that's another part.
Does this come at the cost of having to do things a lot more manually? Because, if you do have inverse kinematics and you move the hand, everything else just follows. So in a sense, it's easier or faster. But now that you have to move each piece individually, does it increase the amount of time you have to put into each animation?
I'm not entirely sure. Like depends on what you do. So there's a balance. So as I was saying before, to me there's a thing of where's the focus, right? You sacrifice somewhere to focus somewhere else. So in my case, I sacrifice in detail in how complex the skeleton is. The skeleton is not very complex. There are not that many pieces. So for instance, the legs are universal for all characters. There are like 3 sets of legs for different heights and stuff like that.
Right.
But the hands are universal. There are like just 10 different hand positions, and these work for all characters.
Okay.
So, and the character only has one head. It's always showing profile, like from the side. And there are only 2 torsos, front and back. And so that means the level of detail you get is not huge, but it's built in a way that allows me to play with it. I mean, I can still get like a 360-degree motion with it. But of course, like if we go into an animation, here we go, like character standing up. So as you see, I have to manually keyframe everything. So that does create some more intensive work on my side of manually placing everything. And as you can see, some things might occasionally misalign a little bit. But yeah, I guess that gets balanced at the fact that the skeleton itself is much simpler.
Right.
So it's easy to work with anyway. And the great thing about Spine is that these animations, they work across characters. We have a single skeleton that we can use across different characters.
You can just
and
swap
that
the character
allows
out.
us to reuse same animation even for different heights of character.
Oh.
So there's some trickery involved to make it work with different heights, but it's possible. So some animations are universal, and some others are made for specific characters to look particularly good on the character. Another thing that I do here is it's not interpolated. So there's these jumps between frames.
Okay.
And this also helps with the low level of detail and tying up the motion. If you interpolate, it's much easier for it to look robotic. So not interpolating, it's closer to how it looks when you animate by hand also, because you usually not animate at like full 25 or 30 frames per second because it's too much work.
Right.
But also it helps tie up little inconsistencies between pieces because the pieces jump. So basically you like animation in itself is already an optical illusion. You have static images put in sequence that your brain interprets as motion. So basically having lower frame rate makes your brain work harder somehow. You make up more frames than there are, right? If you interpolate everything, you don't leave that. Like you show everything that there is. So I think it's easier to make it look good overall when it's not interpolated.
I think it's wonderful how there's a connection between the like unpredictable nature of the animations and the unpredictability of the narrative and the surprise in the gameplay.
Also,
I feel like it's very consistent.
Yes.
All across the board. And I'm sure that I feel this was intentional, right? This kind of connection, this having that theme or that pillar go from the art and animation all the way to the narrative and gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, we take every opportunity we get to tie things up.
Yeah.
Let me see. I had a few notes on this. But basically, yeah, one of the things with this was basically give myself clear, strict limitations. So not that many pieces. The animations have to work for, or almost be easy to work with almost everything. And things like only having like one head. that simplifies, or only having a set number of pieces for the hands. That limits what you can do. Like for instance, I've been using these like 10 or so hand positions for the entire game. And instead of creating a new one every time I am tempted to use a new one for a specific animation I need, I prefer to try to somehow cheat my way through finding the hand that kind of works. And that's much more fun for me creatively, to kind of try to profit from the limitations that we established, make it work with what we have. And in the end, usually the result is even better than to
maybe Nicolas, you could show the ship when we see all the non-playable character.
Also, yes.
Yeah, because we are in every scene we are going to have a lot of non-playable character actually doing something. So it is also for him to have less work to do than he do it this way.
Yeah, it's also like
still a lot of work, but
yeah, it's like things like this, which is like one of the things that was important for me was to dress up these scenes to make them feel alive. And part of that means crowds of people, lots of people inhabiting this world. So the world really feels populated and alive. So that means we need a way to simply create lots of characters that are distinct enough, but also simple enough for a small team like us and me myself doing, like all of these are drawn by hand and drawn by myself. So there needs to be some way to make this simple to do lots of this. So while there are many unique individual pieces, because the structure is very simple and limited, it's kind of counterbalances. It kind of becomes simple to make lots of tiny little pieces if they follow a strict structure. And it's simple to set up all these characters and populate the world if those constraints are really high, right?
Yeah, and so you place them, you can reuse some of those old animations that you had and put those new assets, those unique assets onto those animations. And
Exactly.
before you know it, you have a unique crowd
Yes.
in each different scene. Okay. Could you show us in editor how you swap the characters and you can jump and preview the animations?
So what's really good is like you have like a bunch of pre-made characters that have like a set of poses that you can just drag into the scene, and we can pose them around.
Oh, nice.
So basically populating the scene is quite intuitive because you just have your spine skeleton. So everything is just one skeleton. So all characters in the game are contained in one single place, and we can replace anybody by anybody and make anybody play any animation we have. And we can just go and change the character for another, and it will work immediately. And we can go and change the animation it's using from lists we have here. So that means it's quite quick to just drop in a few characters in the scene, choose a skin for them, choose a pose for them, and we have like a scene like this, right?
Mm-hmm. And so I noticed as you were dragging the character through, was the character snapping to different positions? They sat and then they stood and then...
This is a tool that Ben built, so maybe Ben can talk about it.
Yeah, so the way that works is there's like a little gizmo, that green dot. You can click that, drag it around, and it'll pose the character in a standing position, so whatever their standing animation is supposed to be. They'll be stood where that is, but snapped to the floor height. And so there's a little window you can change what the floor height is supposed to be if the scene's slightly different. But and then if you drag it over something like a chair, it will switch to their seating animation instead and set the character up to be in a seated like state when you run the scene. So that's just to avoid situations where maybe Nikolai would pose a character and you change the animation that the sort of spine component set up for to be seated. but then it would run the game, and then it would be the character like component that we've set up for our game would think it's standing up, and it would be a bit confused. And so we've made this little tool to control both at once, kind of thing.
It's probably also easier for Nikolai to just populate the scenes, right? To just quickly drag someone in. There's this person sitting down, this person standing up. See how it looks very quickly without having to manually make the.
It turned out to be a lot quicker than the old way, which was to like select a couple different drop downs and then find the same animation. But the original intention was just to avoid the bug of thinking characters were sat down and they weren't when you run the scene. But that's a nice little freebie that is a lot quicker.
I think this is a nice segue into talking about the fact that previously when we had talked with Nikolai and their whole team about like how it came together, I mean, Auno told us earlier that, Ben came on after he was just someone who like cold emailed you, and it's ended up being this great talent. But Nikolai having a very traditional background, the one thing I remember you telling me about was that you working with Ben, the great thing about working with Ben was that it allowed you to take your existing knowledge about animation, some of them very traditional analog processes, and then work on it the way that you would want to work on it and hand it over to Ben to finally create all this magic of game development after. So maybe you guys can talk about that.
I mean, for me, it's been a blast because this is like they make a toy for you that just works and exactly what you need. So I feel very lucky to have that. Like things like being able to set like lists of animations for the character to play and to cycle through, like basically being able to have on demand the kind of behaviors you would like, for me has been great.
And I think Ben can also talk about how the game is structured and how we code it, and he create a tool for that to create all the sequences. Because all the game follows some pattern of gameplay, and he create a tool to be able to create the story, the gameplay, and the animation all work together quite. To build that relatively fast for the time, the size of the team we got.
Yeah, and right before we jump into that, which I would love for Ben to show us that, can we quickly see the sprite sheet, Nikolai, that you have for, for the games? Yeah.
So, okay, if I go and see this, I mean, there's like 5 textures like this.
I believe there's around 2,000 pieces for the characters alone in these sprite sheets. So it's a packed sprite sheet we're about to see.
There's around 2,000 pieces in total, yes. And so...
oh, that's great.
Yeah. So as I said, all of this is hand-drawn and scanned and cataloged and everything. But I guess what makes possible to have that many is that very limited structure. Like that makes it easier to produce as much because it's very strictly defined, and when you replace it, it usually just works.
Right. So all the pieces in 4 sheets.
Yeah, I think it fits in 5 sheets. Yeah, well, we have a few left over here.
Yeah.
For the dresses. Yeah, one thing I can briefly show is.
Chat is just shocked right now at the sheer scale of these spread. How we've packed so much into these sprite sheets.
That's so funny. So one thing I can quickly show is what I was talking about. Let me find. So, what I was talking about, the fact that we have just 2 torsos and one head, and that allows for full 360 motion, is, for instance, in this animation, like the character is able to fluidly turn around, but in reality we only have like 1 torso that changes here.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the same one after that.
Nice.
So with just 2 images and just 1 profile, you see profile level changes. in motion it works. And so this is the kind of cheating that I enjoy and in the animation side, that is making simple things work. And instead of creating tons of individual pieces for complex motions like this, also like the legs never change, the arms never change, they're always the same for all poses, right? So I guess that's what I mean, where you can have that massive spreadsheet, but you counterbalance with economy on some other side.
I'm wondering how you achieve the cape. The torso is in two parts. You notice the cape fluttering.
Yes.
Yet the shadow seems lined up always with the, unless that's also an illusion, but seems to be lined up with the body.
Yeah, so a spine allows you to have meshes. So you can have mesh deformation, so you can just...
So that is a deformation. It's one piece.
Yes. So this is, again, I use it very sparingly.
Yeah.
So it's only for this piece. It's the only thing that is a mesh, because the only thing I care that it stays attached. The one on the back is like a simple sprite, because this one is easier to trick and it doesn't matter.
Right.
But the one on the front is harder to trick. So this is a mesh. But again, I restrict myself to as few meshes as possible, because these are very powerful, but takes much more time to set up, basically.
Right.
So we use it for stuff like this very sparingly.
So there's a combination of few techniques that achieve the overall look you're going for. Wonderful. Okay, so Ben, I would love for you to dive into what Arnaud was talking about with the you've built a system.
Yeah.
For the team to use to kind of connect the gameplay and the narrative, and maybe you can explain it better than
Sure. Yeah, so this, springing off what Nikolai's just been talking about, is a good example. Because Nikolai's setting up all these animations that are quite elaborate for different narrative moments in the scenes, we kind of needed a system where he could play around with that kind of stuff himself, so adding custom animations into different points. And so we didn't really want to go for an approach where all of the scene logic was hidden away in code and it was kind of inaccessible to anyone who wasn't a programmer. And so we've developed this node graph type system where we define little bits of the scene narrative stories that I can talk through. So if we go back to the example of the ship scene that we just saw, I'll just show that can we see? Yeah. So this scene that we just watched is quite simple. The characters start and they immediately have a conversation with the captain, and then they're going to go sit down on their chairs, and then you're going to start playing some mini games. The way we have that work in our system is we've got this node graph. I'll just zoom out to show the extent of it. It's very simple, this one. This green one is where we call them sequences. They're essentially little programs where it's going to start. And each of these nodes is like it's not like a tiny little single line of code. It's going to be it's like calling a function or something like that. So they're sort of larger behaviors. And I'll gloss over these first few, but we get to a very simple start of the scene, which is we run some dialogue. I'll zoom in a bit more so you can see that. We run some dialogue, and we name the dialogue node, or the piece of dialogue that we want to play out. And then we do this thing where we say, wait for, we follow this node through this arrow once it's done, and we say, wait for all of these other nodes to stop, which would be these two. So the actor sit at chair and the wait for completed zone interaction. So these I guess 4 nodes are taking care of playing out the dialogue that you see at the start of the scene, and then having the accomplice to the player, the little guy in the pink coat. You're going to make him sit at the chair with this node up here, and you're going to have the player give them the option to sit down with this node down there. And so that's quite a simple, strips down start of a scene. and it's something Nikolai can easily come into and add a new node. So for example, if he wanted to have the comps do some kind of elaborate animation, as soon as he's sat down, he can come in, and he often does, just adds his own animations into the thing. So you can say, I mean, I'm sorry you can't really read this because I don't really know how to scale the font of the system menu, but I'm going to add a custom animation node, and then you can connect it up, and hopefully you can see how that was working. So that's the sort of thing Nikolai does to kind of improvise what he wants to do with the animations, because as we've written a scene, as Francois will have written a scene, he's given some kind of stage directions as to what do we want the characters to do, but Nikolai is going to interpret that and figure out how that works in animation and how many different animations he needs, and how they're going to be cut between different characters. And so that this kind of adding in custom animations is the main reason it's in a node graph and accessible to Nikolai. But what we've done with it and taken it sort of beyond maybe what was the original need is if I open another one. At the start or earlier in the stream, Nikolai explained how it is that card tricks, they're like sequences of little techniques that you piece together, and you do a rehearsal of them, and then it's like a little bit of a puzzle of how they fit together. We've implemented the game in the same way, so there are all the different techniques you learn are individual mini games that we string together through the same node system. I'll just zoom out and show you one of those. So this is a little bit bigger, and I can sort of go through and explain it for you. So if you remember in the scene, you're dealing cards to each player, and there's a little shiner on the table, and you're looking to see what was the best card in the person's hand, the captain's hand. And so the first thing we need to do is make sure that when we are dealing the deck, we're going to have some cards in the hand that are worth looking at. And so we want to look at cards that are either royal cards or aces. And so this rigged stack node, I don't know if I can zoom in a bit more. We're going to start a round with this from here, and then we're going to come in and do a rigged stack node, and that's saying arrange the deck such that this condition is true. And it's quite an elaborate set of conditions that you can specify with this. And the inspiration for that is there's a talk by Ryan Hipple from I think 2017 about scriptable objects, and he talks about this concept of making assets out of independent variables instead of having monolithic components. And so that looks like, let me get an example. I can't really get it in a readable state, I guess, but you'd have individual assets store things like player health or the turn number in like a game like Hearthstone or something like that, and then different systems can all look at that value because it's just a scriptable object asset. It can be referenced anywhere. It's global. All different systems can look at it without any issues of encapsulation. You don't have one. You don't have the player character owning the health value, and then the UI wants to look at it, but it can't get access to it. So that was a really good talk that I recommend people check out. But we took that idea and used it to implement this system where you can pass values into functions that we allow you to put into this node system. So, for example, we have the constraint here for when you're rigging the deck is says cards is face card. So that's saying, is the card a really high one? Is it something we want to put in the captain's hand? And then we are going to test this parameter card. And so this kind of system of having individual values be their own assets allows us to plug them into functions that we define in the node editor instead of just setting up parameterless scripts that kind of can't branch or anything or do anything different. We allow this allows you to like put in data and be conditional about things, and it makes it a bit more like programming than you might be able to get away with just put in monolithic functions one after another. And so
I wonder when working on this, what is the workflow? So do you build? So say there's a scene. Do you build out the overall structure, and then the team comes in and makes a few changes here and there? So like Nikolai can jump in, add a node for animation. Arno can jump in, add a node for the narrative or for the cutscene or something. Or does Arno go in and build it all, or how does it work exactly?
So the way it tends to work is Francois will write the narrative structure of a scene, and then myself or Ludwig or whichever developer will go through and set up the skeleton of that roughly, and we'll put in all the mini games, and we'll put in the sort of key moments that are like really obviously going to happen as part of the narrative. We'll put in the different dialogue beats, and so you'll be able to play it, and then at a certain point later on, Nikolai will come through, he'll play the scene, he'll sort of assess what does it need to kind of give it a bit more life. He'll make some new animations, and then he'll just on his own put in some new custom animations and things like that, or little new interactions, things like that. So it's usually like a two-phase thing, like myself or another developer will make the scene roughly, and then Nikolai will come and finesse it at the end.
And the other advantage of this system is to iterate. Like when we do playtest, or when we change our mind about the story, we go relatively fast to modify things. And we're not going to talk about this today, but like all the part of what we call mini games, or the technique you're actually playing, they rely a lot of how you actually rig or modify the deck, or which cards are in the deck, in which order they may or may not appear. And this is through iteration. So a system like that is very, very flexible and allow us to iterate fast, which is very important when you are a small team. And this game is a little bit experimental too, in some extent, because the gameplay is not traditional. Like we don't have one loop we repeat all the time. We've got multiple loops for each scene. So it's a big challenge in terms of game design to make this work. And the narrative is also quite complex. So these tools allow us to do the project at a good pace.
Right.
I think like if without this tool, we may take much more time, probably months.
That's right. Because the way you explained the game, you said each scene or each part of the game is like has its own different mini games, and then the narrative has to be linked into those unique mini games each time, and so you need some kind of overall tool that can make that whole process easier, rather than making things unique each an individual each time.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Oh, this looks like a complicated web over here. This must be.
Yeah. So this is by far the most complicated sequence we have, and it's the one that it kind of acts as that backbone structure of the scenes that you play in the game. So the ship sequence that I showed you earlier was like a handful of nodes, right? It's very, very simple to look at, and that's because it kind of sits on top and plugs into this big skeleton sequence. And so that's something we kind of encountered maybe about halfway through putting together the scenes, that we could kind of like take out a lot of the commonality and the sort of the sameness between the scenes. They all follow a similar structure, generally follow a similar structure, and so it allows us to kind of keep each scene-specific stuff just scene-specific stuff, and we don't have any boilerplate in between. So this sequence, when you play it, it sort of switches between doing the narrative part of the scene at the start, and then doing the mini game rounds in between, and then whatever results at the end of the scene, maybe you win or maybe you get caught, it'll take care of switching to those different like little branches. But it's
so this
kind of
would be shared across the different scenes.
Yeah, so this gets played in pretty much every like main scene in the game, and then along with it will be something specific to each scene. that kind of gets called, if you will, to figure out what to do for that specific scene.
Okay. Yeah, so tools like this, I think, just really speed up the development of the game, right? But it's not just these like technical tools, but also systems you put in place for the art, right? So I believe there's like a lighting system that you have in place because you draw these scenes, you put these scenes together, but then there's also the processing effects and the lighting that's implemented in the game. And a lot of our users and a lot of our community are always trying to find unique ways to implement lighting in their 2D games, right? And some people will use our Unity's 2D tools, and some people find other creative ways to achieve a look of lighting, right?
Yeah.
I believe you have your own unique way of doing that. Nikolai, I think you're going to show that to us.
Yes, I can show that a little bit, and maybe a bit.
Yeah, we can pull up
shared
we can pick up that location scene, and then we can break it down right after.
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's pull it up.
So these are transition screens we use for the game when cutting to a new location. Now you travel somewhere, you get this little vignette, and then you cut, in this case, to the interior of the ship, and the scene is going on. So most of these are there just to transition, but they were quite important for me to establish a world, because as it is a game about sitting at a table, not moving around, you're not going to be exploring the world, at least not in the standard sense in most video games where you walk around the world, right? So these are the only places you can world build. And very important to me that they look like living paintings. So that's where the care for light is quite important. Like for me also, when coming from illustration and then into animation, then into video games, I spent a long time doing images for print, for paper, then moving into making images for screens. To me, one of the most satisfying things is being able to create light, because the screen is light. You can have light effects and change of color, and that's to me a pleasure to play with. And so I really, in this goal of making it look like living paintings, to portray a living world that you can, because you're not going to be exploring it by foot, and you're going to be restricted to these scenes, they need to suggest a larger world than the one you're going to see, and to stimulate your imagination. So for me it was important, all the details, like the light changing, the clouds, the little birds flying by, the people populating the scene, all these little things add up and create this feeling of being in a place. So hopefully people have this experience of visiting like this imagined 18th century France. Of course, not in the scene, but you also have like the sway of the trees, little particle effects, like in this case the shine effect on the water.
Mm-hmm. That shimmering on the water is actually a particle effect?
Yes, I can show here.
Yeah, that's see that.
So you have here like, oh wait, why is it like this? Okay, so this is just this particle effect that is quite simple. It's like a circle with a radius that creates this random texture from a texture sheet. So yeah, it takes these tiny blobs of paint that I made and pokes them out randomly and fades them out. So
and that's just laid on top of the
yes,
drawing of the water.
So for something like the water, here's another thing that for me is fun to kind of figure out and play around. Like the water here is quite rudimentary in that it's just one texture On top of it, there's a tiling texture, which is just a texture with a material that has a tiling effect on it. So it's moving, and then the particle effect on top, right? And so I'm pretty sure it would be possible to figure out some more elaborate shader effect that creates some more complex effect of water. But also, this is so simple to set up, and it does the trick. Like, you can kind of see the trick. It's not really, it's not very sophisticated. But this I figured out playing with the tools we had. Like, we had set up the tiling effects for the clouds, and I was toying around with the particle system. And I figured out this is something you can do. And so finding a simple solution that takes like a few minutes to set up and does the trick, to me is much more interesting. Because we have this painterly style, I'm kind of unsure if making a shader that would fit that style would not take longer than this. It might be more complicated. So every time we can, if we can solve it with simple tools, is great. And the particle system is very fun to work with. The birds are also a particle system here. So like they create like these little birds that fly around. And
I wouldn't
honestly,
have. It's funny you said that because I thought the water was a shader at first, but now seeing
Really?
this, I see it's just it's a bunch of it's a scrolling texture, 2 particle effects. The birds I thought might be animated assets, but it's again another particle effect. I love the way you just find the simplest way to achieve the thing, and it looks wonderful. It looks fantastic.
It's the ultimate
and it blends
cheat.
right in. Yeah.
yeah.
Using
Love
the
it.
tools at your disposal. Why go out of your? Why go beyond?
Yeah, I mean,
that?
I toy around with these things to see if something works out before asking like Ben or somebody else to make something specific. Because if this does it, then great. And honestly, particle effects, I don't like have a full understanding of it. There's lots of options here, but it's been very fun to toy around with.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure if the way I'm doing it is the best, but it works. So,
I love that. It's the 80-20 rule, right? Where you only need to know 20% of the features to be able to achieve most of the whatever you need in your game, right? You don't actually need to know.
Might be true.
Yeah.
I think we talk
true.
about this really often. Like we do game jams really often, and we get a lot of like new developers coming in, especially those who are artists and who are just starting to get into game development, and they're always trying to think of the most impressive, most like interesting shaders that they can do. And I always tell them the limitations, and this is something that's great about your game. You mentioned it several times during this stream. There's kind of like a beauty in having very strong limitations, and we'll see this like throughout the whole month. All the developers we're bringing on came with very like interesting limitations to their games, and then we're able to make it into a feature. And I think that translates so well to that art style from the 80s, from Eastern influence of animation, which is there's technological limitations, but eventually becomes an entire style that's like propagated in that particular in that particular genre. I see it here too, so it's really nice to see when people are in chat like, oh, we thought that was a stutter. I'm like, but that's part of the feature now,
Yeah, I mean, there's also some limitation with the art style. Like as I said, the goal was to make living paintings, or at least evoke that idea. And we were not going to go full 18th century oil painting style because, well, first, that's not very interesting for me, but I also think it's much more complicated and restrictive. So I wanted it to feel more modern than that, but reference that. Yeah. So what I'm doing is I'm using a technique that is called monoprinting, which is basically stamping paint on a paper. Like, again, the backgrounds are handmade, but they're made in layers, and it's basically paint that is stamped on a paper and manipulated in a variety of ways to achieve different textures. And this technique has a lot of limitations in that you cannot have much detail. Like, you cannot stamp things that are too thin, and tiny, very intricate details will get blurred out because you need enough paint for it to pass to the paper, so you lose that detail. But you gain another detail in exchange, which is the organic detail of printed material that is imprecise and that has that intricacy of the texture of the paper and the paint and stuff like that. So you get that trade-off, which is very nice. Like your art looks organic, it looks high resolution, but in essence is very similar to how you would work with low resolution because you cannot have much detail. So you need big shapes, big simple shapes to structure things. So that leads to suggestion. You have to suggest more than you show.
Yeah.
Because you cannot stamp tiny, very intricate details. You need simple details that do the trick. Then you layer those. And to me, it's kind of the perfect, like you get the best of both worlds. Like you get the high res feeling of painter style, and you get that like the advantage of low resolution. I think that's one of the reasons why like pixel art is still popular is the lack of detail leads to interpreting what you see, and so your imagination adds to it, and you kind of stimulates your imagination when you watch it. And I try to play a bit with that, like with the fact that the textures are kind of as I say, they're big. You can actually show like this is what they look like.
Oh, nice.
It's like this kind of stuff. So stamp a bunch of stuff like this, which doesn't look like much on its own, but then we tint it and layer it. And this, for example, it's like the same stamp twice in different ways. So you can play with it. You can stamp the same shapes in different ways and then choose, oh, I like this one for this, I like this other one for that. And it's very playful because you never get the same thing. You never know exactly what you're going to get when you stamp it. You have some degree of control, but you have some degree of randomness. So it forces you to play. And then you layer it. Then the color is on computer after that. Like it's layered and colored. But it also allows you to exaggerate. Because again, I wanted to be able to play. So because we have this a bit simplified style where we use simple shapes and we evoke the style, we can exaggerate. So we have impossible absurd ceilings, like the ceilings are way too high. Like if you look at the ship again, the ship itself, it doesn't make too much sense. Like it has a huge ceiling that is kind of curved.
Right.
There's like it's kind of grounded in actual research. I did look at into like for all these scenes, I do look at like the architecture of the time, but then I exaggerate the proportions, I exaggerate the positions of things because I want to create more like this, as we said, like it's the fantasy of being a cheater, it's the fantasy of 18th century Baroque, and so we want to play with that. Yeah. And the style, because it's kind of, you get this crude big blobs of texture, leads into that somehow. Like you have this lack of, as I said, lack of precision, but richness of organic detail that is beautiful.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think if everything looked so perfect and was so clean, but then there was this exaggeration of the proportions, then it might look off actually, because it's like it's almost realistic, but it's not. So what's going on here? But
yes, it also matches. It also matches the characters, the imposition of the characters. It all feeds into that. And I also getting derailed. We're going to show the lighting system.
Oh yeah, please.
So sorry.
No,
so
great.
So here, like we have the ship lights, which you can see is like this. Little textures that can turn on and off, and these also like are individual sprites. Let me grab one and move it around. So these are watercolor textures that I did. So this I just dropped watercolor on a paper, scanned this, and we use this for the lighting, like has an additive shader, and this allows it to merge nice. Like the fact that this is also an organic shape, it merges nicely with the art, and you can get to shine on the art in an organic way. And so we have a bunch of these that are white, and we can tint them in different colors to get like lights of different colors very easily. And then Ben built this little system where we can like assign a set of sprites to be used as lights, and then assign a curve for the transparency, and that gets played out, and they got randomized. So everyone starts at a random position of the curve.
So this is for those watercolor
Yes.
like blobs of light, and they can change in color.
Yeah,
and
so that they
transparency.
organically flow
Right,
in and out,
right.
and not in sync. Like everyone
Yes.
starts in a randomized position. And on top of that, we have like the post-process effects. So what we did, and I don't know how weird this is or not. Like this is what we came out, is that have two post-process settings. So basically, have some bloom and some color correction here that basically tints the entire scene a certain way. And we have another that tints everything a certain other way.
Okay.
And what we do is we blend between the two, again with another curve. So basically at the same time as the light is kind of flowing, the entire palette is shifting slowly
Right.
from one set of colors. And I wanted something like this. Like this is something that Ben came out with as a solution. And I really like how it works. It has been very, very nice. Like I really like the flexibility that this gives you. Like you can really change the colors a lot and really change the scene quite dramatically if you want to, or very subtly when you want to. But it's very flexible to set up these little components to shift the colors. And the ability to blend between them, again, that allows that living painting feel, that every pixel is constantly changing. Because, as we said, like because the camera is not going to be moving, to me that's important, that the entire picture is somehow shifting all the time,
Right.
even if you don't really notice it because it's very slow. But over time, it feels like it's alive.
So one of the many ways you've been adding life to these scenes, including the particles and
Yes.
maybe like just the crowds, the idle animation, all these little touches you could call the polish that brings it all to life.
Exactly, yeah. So this all layered, like a lot of simple things layered on top, and they end up creating this illusion.
And is this something you knew, like when you decided, on the art style and wanted to jump into making it look this way? Did this come layer by layer over time?
Yeah.
Thoughts on how, I'm gonna add a crowd, I'm gonna make sure it's a living painting by adding like particles in this way, or did it come all at once, or was it as you were building the game you started to come to these realizations?
No, not really. But before, I was toying around with like dynamic pictures by myself. Like before we started Card Shark, I was using another tool, Construct, which because I'm not smart enough to use Unity. For me, it's too hard. Sorry. But
You're here now.
as a, I was using that to make illustrations that kind of change. Like I was toying with possibilities.
Yeah.
So I had some ideas coming from that, basically, and also coming from film. Like when I was making animation, of course I had done some things in animation that I wonder, how could I do this in a game?
Right.
So basically, gradually, as we were building up the beginnings of the game, we were making the scenes. I was asking around, okay, how can we make so that the colors shift, or we have like light and shadow? I thought we were like going to be layering like big sprites on top or something, and then I I don't know if Francois started using this or it was Ben. I don't really remember. But this came
Francois.
along as a solution, and I toyed with it, and it's like, oh, this is much better than anything because sometimes I don't even know what's possible, right? So I guess sometimes I ask for things, and it's like, okay, imagine, like, how can we have crowds? Like, that's another thing, right? We wanted people walking around the scenes sometimes. So like in this ship location, when we ran it, we have people running, like walking around the scene. And this again is a little component that Ben built. Where is it? It's in the background. Yeah, here. This passing NPCs component. It lets set you like a height and a limit. Or like the yellow bars are showing like the limits, and the purple bar is showing the height. And it lets me select a set of skins, like a set of characters to use, and which walking animations to use for them, and then how many people at maximum, and the delays between spawning them and stuff like that. So basically when you run it, it populates the scene with people. So this again, I asked Ben, like, okay, what can we do so we have people walking around and populate the scenes? And he came out with this. So this does come kind of gradually as we figure out what we're missing.
Right.
You showed
you
so
don't know
many.
what questions to ask at first. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
You showed so many great scenes, actually, and so I love that. I love it if you can share. Chat just asked several people, Apple A12X, and also Sinocream asked, like, which location, all of you actually, did you really enjoy working on the most? Like, which situation or scene did you really enjoy building out?
Well, this ship has been really fun, to be honest. This one was a good one. Also because we kind of imagined that the idea, like we had from a while this decided that we're going to use the shiner effect in the ship. But so we had in the back of our minds the possibility that we could use this play that the shiner moves around because the ship is swaying, right?
Mm-hmm.
So actually, when we went and did it, it worked a lot better than I thought. At least myself. Like I had the intuition it might work, but when we did it, it worked like immediately, and it was immediately very fun, very satisfying to use. And I guess another of the fun things, the way that Shiner moves, we use the same system we use for the ships here. They sway a little, and the trees. In other scenes, we have trees swaying. So we use like the same system for that, and so it was very fast to set up and test. It was great. So the ship was very fun.
We have another question, again related to the locations. I'm wondering, you might want to keep this mostly secret, but I thought I'd ask anyway, how much variety can we expect from the locations and situations?
Well, we try to maximize it
Yeah.
to the best of our ability.
Safe answer.
So, I mean, I am personally quite satisfied with the variety, but I don't know, man. You cannot manage people's expectations safely. It's very hard. What can we say?
You travel in different countries.
Yeah, they're different countries. They're interiors and exteriors. There are like poor and rich locations.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, within like the resources we have and the time we had, we try to make it as varied as possible. Also because it's fun for us. Like we don't want to repeat ourselves too much.
Yeah, you mentioned working up the social ladder, so I'm excited to see how that's translated in the environment and locations. Very, very exciting. There's another question which asks, will there be an element of replayability to the game?
I hope so, because with achievement, like, and if you really try to master the game, you will have to replay it various times. And there is some surprises in the game that we cannot really spoil now. But you will have various reasons, to replay the game, I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a two-part question, probably for Ben, because I think a lot of our people who are in the chat are Unity developers and they want to learn about this. But is there any particular effect or something that Nikolai brought to you that you thought was particularly challenging to create and code? And will you share it on YouTube one day for the rest of our community? They're curious if you're going to do that.
I don't know if there was a visual effect that was particularly challenging. I think the hardest thing to help Nikolai to set up was the node editor. But the passing NPCs that you talked about, that's gone through probably the most iterations. I think that the lighting system was a prototype when I started that Francois had made, and that has been mostly the same. I've just fixed it up a little bit. But the passing NPCs we started with is very basic. You would just have like the same skin sort of going past, and it looked a bit boring. And then now we've got it to the point where you've got different characters with different sort of animation sets that they might use, and they're going to be like different depths in the scene, which we sort of fake with scale and position and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. Visually, it's been, because I mean, you've heard of how Nikolai works. He uses quite straightforward approaches and kind of makes the most of what he has. It's not been too challenging to set up that kind of thing for him. It's been more difficult to set up the way in which he would kind of improvise animation into the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thank you. Will you ever share, do you guys ever think about doing any devlogs? I feel like this is the first of the devlogs, but I think the community would love to see that someday if you're ever interested.
I mean, I could write up some of the detail on how the where I took the, Ryan Hippel's variable asset concept, because I think that is probably quite useful for people to see. Mm-hmm. The node editor, I think if people started on the process of trying to make a node editor, they'd probably sort of stumble past where I got to. Like, I don't think I've taken it that far. But the other thing I can talk about for sure.
Awesome, thank you. Question, Nikolai, were there any specific magicians that the tricks were based on for this game?
Right, yes.
Oh.
So there's of course Ricky J. And I don't know if there's a particular, like, there are a bit of references and ideas, but it's like from magicians specifically, it's not so obvious, because magicians that do gambling demonstrations, they do it very theatrically. Mm-hmm. So they don't really show something that is very practical. They show the illusion of like the gambling effect. So I did look at stuff like that. I think there's like Ricky J, Richard Turner, but they both very theatrical. None of it translates into game very effectively. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we do have one thing straight from, not so much a trick by Ricky J, but from there's a show where he talks about gambling and cheats and things, and we took an idea from there, and I won't spoil what it is, but he talks about various ways or various tools the magician has at his disposal. He does talk about shiners, for instance. Mm-hmm. Like in his talk, he gives the anecdote of a cheater that puts a knife on the table and like a menace and says, "There will be no cheating in this game," and then use the reflection of the knife to pick at the cards, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to steal that straight up, because that felt a bit too much.
Yeah.
But the shiner was not specifically taken from him. I saw that in various sources. So, but I remember that anecdote by Ricky J. And so we decided to go with a tobacco box, which is more like a something that's believable that you will have on a table at the time, and that it will be shiny.
Yeah.
So
But
apart from that, there is
Ernacé, no?
yeah,
As
there
a
is
big reference.
Erdnase. But Erdnase is not a magician, and it's a pseudonym of some cheater in early 20th century who wrote a very influential book on card cheating techniques and signed it as W.S. Erdnase, and which is believed to be an acronym of Andrews. So it's some American cheater who sold the book because he needed money. He needed money, and he wrote a book revealing how the methods he used. And that's a book that became very influential, and Ricky J credits it as being very influential in his career. And we took a lot of stuff from there. Like there's some stuff that is straight up word for word from that book. Mm-hmm. So it's safe to say that it's an old book. It's been published for a while. Probably many of the techniques are obsolete or have been evolved upon, but we use the actual material as if it was true. Yeah, there's a bunch of things in the game that are actually from that book.
Yeah, I think this game does a great blend of feeling very whimsical and but then really grounded in historical elements and real card playing, and I think that's like part of the fun. Like you can fantasize a little bit about this, and it really reminds me of the late 90s when magic and tricks and the theater of like magic was a really big thing, and revealing it was a really big thing, so that it would push more innovation. So I love that you're modernizing something like this. This game really does feel like an homage to old styles, history, but also feels very, very today. So I really, really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love this game. I'm really excited about it. I think that's all we have for questions. Hassan, did you see any more questions that we should ask? Hassan is muted, so I will.
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I had some construction going on, so I had to mute myself. Nikolai wanted to ask you, what's the most impressive effect or scene that you're most proud of in the game, or at least that you're able to talk about, that you've shown us?
Well, okay. Maybe not the most impressive in a technical skill. There's probably nothing that is particularly elaborate in the technical side. But what I'm proud of is we have the carriages. Mm-hmm. We have the carriage scenes. This is when you travel from scenes to scene. Maybe it's better if you show, because you have a video of the carriage scene going to the ship.
Yeah, we can pull up the carriage.
It's probably faster than me playing it here. And I guess what I like is we needed this idea of moving around and traveling the carriage. And as you can see there, you can only see the landscape inside the carriage, not outside of it. And like you get this black kind of abstract texture moving out, but you can see through the window what they supposedly actually see about the landscape they're traveling through. And this again is a compromise of economy. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to do the entire landscape moving.
Right.
It's too complicated. It's too much. And it will look repetitive very fast. Or we have to build like tons of assets and very elaborate randomization of the assets, so the landscape is really rich. And also what happens when you travel into different countries and to different geographical places. Like it just scales the amount of work to a ridiculous level. Yeah. So this tiny trick of showing it just through the tiny window, it achieves that effect at like, I don't know, a tenth of the cost or even less. And it also, again, it's a way I think stimulates the imagination because it's suggestive. It suggests something that is not entirely there and leans you into imagining that. Another you can see here. Oh well, no, no, it's not here. It's in the ship. Another I'm proud is when the shiner moves here in the ship when they start swaying. The wine also wobbles a little, and that wobble of the wine is super rudimentary also. But I was surprised myself that it worked.
How well it
Like
worked.
when I was setting it up, I thought it would be a disaster, and that we would need some clever fake 3D. I don't know. Like I wanted like that wobble, and I was playing around and thinking, would I in the end need to ask to be able to put it in actual 3D so we get the deformation? I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And then I just set up. It's just a little bit of left-right motion and a little bit of scale that stretches and squashes it. And it's like a few pieces that are cut out and they are played in a bit of delay between each other. And so that does that little wobble and it's super convincing. And I saw that, it was like, I am so happy. It just works.
I love how you achieve so many things through experimentation. Like that's a theme I've been seeing with the work on this game. There's a lot of experimentation to see if there's like you're never sure of the thing you're gonna do before you do it. You try, you see if it works,
yes.
and then you move forward. And I think that's very inspiring. I want to thank all of you so much for like going into so much detail, showing us all the tricks behind the game, all the touches you've put into it, all the passion you've put into this game. I think it's just incredible for our users to see, for our community to see, and it was incredible for Carol and I to see, honestly.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you so much. So don't forget, you can follow the team on their Twitter at Nerial, and please go wishlist the game on Steam a little bit very soon. And you can go check out their website at cardsharpgame.com as well. They have a great IGN article that we mentioned earlier. We also linked a bunch of stuff in chat that were inspirations and the talks that Ben had talked about. So don't worry if you didn't, you missed a lot. The video will be on demand as always on Twitch after the stream ends. And for this week, like we said, we just kicked off Developer Week, but we have a ton of other streams. Tomorrow we'll be checking out Boomerang X, and then on Wednesday we'll be checking out Death's Door. So 3 completely different developers, all with their different kind of limitations, but we really want to show you how small teams come together to make really beautiful, stunning games. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the entire Nerial team for joining as well.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'll see you all
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye.